Hello, everybody. Hello. Hey, this is Eddie. This is our Thursday interactive Black history and knowledge session at the Erudition Network. We do this every Thursday where we get on and we talk about Black history. Um, Today we are doing a end of year review. We're going to hit some things and talk about some things. Um, that we've talked about over the last year, right? Um, Things that we've learned, knowledge that we've gained from um, just getting together every Thursday and having these discussions. um, what I love about the interactive, I've always loved about it, is that it provides the opportunity for us to interact with people live. And when we initially started this program, this juncture, um, we that was the whole purpose. And it was a little bit scary because a lot of times we don't know um, what the audience is going to talk about, right? Or what they are going to bring to the discussion. I know we're having a little bit of lag. We're fixing that in the background right now. That hopefully will be fixed. Um, but our whole thing has always been to teach and to provide knowledge and understanding, which is one of the tenets um, of our program and what we do. So, I take it very seriously that when we get on here every Thursday and we have these discussions. Sorry, I didn't see you all at first. Good to see you, Mike. I'm glad you're here. Sean Anthony, good to see you. Teddy, good to see you. Teddy, good to see you. Good to see you. But getting back to what I was saying, I'm really happy you guys are all here. The interactive doesn't work as well. I mean, I could get on here and I could talk about history all night, right? And I don't have a problem in going into some of these things. But I do love having people on and having you all to join in. Hey, do me a favor. If you're on here tonight, and just give us a shout out. Let us know name something that you learned this year on Erudition through this program or through Tina's program too, that you might have not known, or some coping technique, that Tina provided, because she does a lot of on her program to try to help people with their coping. Something that you've learned, something that you've picked up as a tool or as a form of understanding over this last year, because that's what this review is about tonight. We have to give God the glory for what has gone on this past year. Over this past year, things haven't always been easy, and there's a lot of things that have come up that needed a historical or a better understanding for, and we have tried to do the best that we could in giving you that as an audience and giving that to the world, to our community. And I think we should review and talk about where we are. There are things I'm sure that I learned over this year, and preparing myself to do these episodes on Thursdays. There are things I had to go and re-engage in, and things I had to go reread. And I often, every year, I talk about how many books that I have actually read for the year. And I haven't even calculated how many books that I've had to read for the year. I leave these books in the back, but I have books all over and books that are online. There's so much to learn every day. And then to share it, don't sit on knowledge, to share it with others. So if you've gotten anything from this year, please. I think we've helped to fix the feed, the background. I'm very appreciative of that. Thank you, Teddy, because he helps out a lot with the background feed. I do appreciate it. But, again, what we're talking about tonight. Oh, I see somebody did comment. Kumba. Yes, yes. The name of Ghana and how those original names. Now, it's important that we remember these things, right? Because here's the thing. A lot of our history is denied to us, has been hidden from us. And things as simple as a name, get taken from us. And we don't remember those names, or we don't have a really good understanding of those names because, we're not taught them in school. Now, what's funny is, um, we sit around and we look at the kings and queens of England, the French kings and queens. We look at the royal families of Portugal, Spain, the castle. We look at Castile. How we look at all of these things, and they're taught to us in our history books. Not to mention the ideas of our founding fathers and who they are and what they are, and so much is covered in the European understanding of culture that we don't go enough into our own culture. And I think that of all the things that we try to bring to you every Thursday and every Monday is that understanding. When Tony talks about Kumbaya Ghana and understanding, that Kumbaya was the name that the Africans gave it, and Ghana was the name that the foreigners called it. And because we have been using that name, and there's nothing wrong with using that name, we forget, it takes away from the history of it. We forget that the Arabs and the Europeans helped to give names to some of these places, right? The Mohammedans and the Arabs who came in and gave Ghana that name, taking it away from the African side. I remember, I think we talked about it earlier in the year, that Professor Harry Lewis Gates has a documentary he did several years ago where he went over to Africa and he was trying to trace, Ghana being one of the places, trace the lineage of Africans. And many of the Africans that Dr. Gates happened upon aligned themselves more with their Arab background than they did their African background. And then some wanted to align themselves with their European heredity, but very few wanted to talk about them. And this is in Africa, wanted to talk about their actual African lineage. And he found it disheartening because that meant that they felt that there was something wrong with their lineage. They felt that there was something that wasn't quite right with that lineage. And so when I go over these things, I try very hard to make sure we understand, hey, we got to know these things. Mike, you said, I learned about the Tulsa massacres. Yes, we went very heavily into the Tulsa massacres. We still have footage when we, as a family, we went down to Oklahoma and we walked the staircases to nowhere. And we took pictures and we did some video. Then we wound up getting COVID, so we weren't able, I didn't get back to cutting up that footage. But it was a surreal experience to go to Tulsa and to walk those stairs and to walk through those communities, and then to listen to the lies that are out here where people say, oh, well, those areas right there, that's urban renewal, and then to realize that a lot of it was lies, and go drive through the neighborhoods and see the houses of that was there from turn of the century, and see how my wife pointed out how well these houses were built. These were Black areas that white folks later went in, and they went and started to live in those areas, but they took those areas over. It was heartbreaking to see that. But I think the thing that we learned also in relation to what you're saying, Mike, is we also learned that when we look at the Tulsa Massacre, many of us are taught about the Tulsa Massacre, but we were not taught about the renewance and what happened after the massacre, the struggles, and we tried to go over that in our lesson, the struggles that the people had in rebuilding without the insurance companies backing them up, without support of the town, Black folks coming together in their church groups and in their families to reestablish those buildings. And not until the 1980s where they went in and changed the districting and flushed those people fully out. This was years of work that racists put in to strip the area of Greenwood of its wealth, right? And it wasn't just the massacre, which was horrendous. It was what was done after the massacre. So I loved going over that. We do need to do another program and show you the footage that we filmed when we actually went to Oklahoma. 49ers. Oh, the real 49ers. You know, we talk so much about the football. And everybody was up in arms about Redskins and how you have this name and how you do this. But nobody realized that the San Francisco 49ers, to many in the indigenous and even in the Asian community, should be a name that is just as offensive. When the gold rush happened with the 49ers, they not only victimized the indigenous people and created a genocide and murdered and killed young indigenous people, even going so far as to cut off, and for the sensitive out here, testicles and using them as purse bags, absconding with people's kids and using them as slaves, taking the land from Asians and even killing some Asians, and then going about with the country to initiate a law that prevented Asians from coming over to the United States because they felt that the Asians were getting more of the gold. But this is the thing, the Asians and the indigenous people who were over there were victims of the racial lunacy of the time, jumped off of white wealth. But yet we have a football team, right, called the 49ers. And many don't know that history. Many have not, that hasn't been shared with us. So we respond and react by right to Native American names being, or Redskins, talking about the scalping of indigenous people, but we don't talk about the thousands of indigenous people that were raped, murdered, and killed by the 49ers. Yes, thank you, Mike. The whole purpose of this program is to make you understand that history is a lot deeper. It responds to a lot more of our society. There are things that have happened in our society because of history, because of the people that we've had to deal with. Shout out to me. When in reality, there should have been proud lineages. There should be things that are shared. There should be things that we know. Well, that's all throughout history. We run into this idea where they take the credit for what we do, what our people, our culture have done. And the understanding of that, as we've tried to cover over the last year, is that it's done with a purpose. It's done with a purpose. You know, we look at a lot of the things that are going on as if they're just happening, when in reality, they're not just happening. They are a cyclical experience that continues to happen. And many of us, I don't think that we get as interested with it unless we can see a part of it play out, right, in our actual lives. And I think that what we try to do, what we've tried to do, and I think we've done it successfully over the year through this program, is give you some of those things, right? Uh, so that you can better get a good understanding of where you come from. I'm struggling with that one right there, getting that thought out. But we talked about a lot of things this year, and we studied a lot of things this year. We talked about the Maroons. We did several lessons on the Maroons. Weren't they also lynching Chinese folks during the Gora? Yes. They killed Chinese. They murdered them. So it was a way, Tony, to discourage them from coming over here. And because of that trauma, here's the thing about the Chinese. When the Chinese came over during the gold rush, it wasn't that they found the better land. What it was is that they were they worked harder, and so when you have taxes put on foreigners, they try to tax the Asians more for the same lands and plots than they did with whites, right? And they had no choice but to pay foreigner taxes that they put on them. And then they also were subject to those violent attacks, being killed, having their families killed. It was sick at the country, and then going to Congress and passing laws to stop the immigration of Asians over here. If you were to go through the history of immigration in this country, people are surprised with what we see at the borders right now. But America has been prone since its founding with anti-immigration laws. The Asians, not just Chinese, even though that's what they called all of them and wrapped them in, but there was anti-immigration laws from the 1800s into the early 1900s, all the way through until where we are now. So we're not surprised with that. And then we actually talked about this when we talked about the 49ers, but we also talked about the Alamo, right? That's another anti-immigration thing that we don't talk about. Here's the thing, though, but it wasn't America that did that. The Spanish opened up plots of land for Americans to go down in Texas, and they went down there. And they went down there so they could be able to hold on to their slaves. Black people play a very big, huge part in the Alamo, but we're not reminded of that. They went there because they wanted to retain slavery. The Spanish had gotten rid of slavery. And then the Americans went down there and they told the Americans to leave. You're not going to have subject people to slavery, and you don't have right to this land. This is our land. And the people said, no, we're going to stay. And so you had the situation with the Spanish and America that led to the Alamo, right? Because of the sentiment that we're going to stay here and push these laws and push what we want to do, regardless of what you say. They use the system to excuse and to continue to abuse the stealing of property, like intellectual property and ideas, employment, implement in there. And that's the thing, Tina. We have to understand that, and I know we talk about this a lot. And I ladies and gentlemen, I know I say that. We got to understand. I try to say that because we do. We have to understand that a lot of these things feed back. They're still affecting us today because they had an impetus back then. If we look at the age of discovery, we talked about that this year. We talked about what was brought over here, what was stolen. We talked about the PRS map and how the Portuguese. We talked about how all of this knowledge has been taken from us over centuries. Look now, Now look at home. Some of them treat us. Look how some of them they have a big U.S. goal or ambitious goal of 1 billion citizens living on the continent of Africa by 2030. Yes, and nobody's talking about that, Tony. Nobody's talking about the problems that Africa is still having on purpose. Here's something that I don't know if we've covered on the program, but maybe we should. When we look at the famines that they say happen in Africa, and I went through over the last couple of weeks, and I talked to you about the topology of Africa and the topological map and how it's broken out. And we know that there are struggles in certain areas of Africa because of the way Africa is, but it's also why Africa is so plentiful and so nourishing, because it is multiple different climates and multiple different hemispheres. They know this. But ever since the dawn of time, the beginning of time, because man comes from Africa, there has always been something there for man to be able to survive. So when I look at the famines and things that they say in Africa and people starving, it always makes me mad. Because here's the thing. We have people in parts of Africa, we have people even in the Middle East and Dubai who will go out and they're creating land masses. They're making human land masses where they can go and grow crops and things outside of the water. Before Gaddafi was killed in Libya, they were doing that. So the desire to feed people is there, but the methodology to starve them is there too, because if we can remove people and make them subservient, starve them, this is a thing in history that we see often. If we can put them into duress, they will be willing to accept anything we offer them to take away the stress, pain, and hurt of them. And so that way we can come over there as the savior, even though we are the ones who are causing you to have these problems. It's horrific. It's not without its history, and it is why it is so important that we know our history. Funny how things always lead back. Slavery, chattel slavery, the idea of the Atlantic slave trade changed the world. It changed the world. Even before slave trade, when you had early explorers, even with Columbus coming over here, it changed the world. It went from we don't talk about a lot of the exploration of early world because that's not beneficial for us. What we're taught in school and what we've tried very hard to cover here every Thursday is that what we're taught in school is predominantly about the conquering, imperialistic ideals of American life, of European life, right? We're taught these things on purpose because, see, as long as they can keep us with those lies and teaching us these lies from the time of kindergarten all the way through high school, and now in some ways in certain colleges, right? Because we're stopping the actual learning of things, and we're telling people that this is not what you need to learn. This is not what you need to know. And educators who have been around for hundreds of years now, who were not biased or corrupt, have tried to tell us these things. But unfortunately, the powers that be, the people that rule, have kept us lost, kept this stuff hidden from us. We don't learn about a lot of the things that we should learn about. You know, the idea that Columbus, I'm often talking about Columbus and how I think we went over a little bit this year again, right? And how they never told you that Columbus already knew where he was going. We're lied to and told a lie created by writers that they did it because they thought that the world was flat. They knew the world wasn't flat. Science had already proven that. That's a lie, but it's a convenient lie to keep us lost. Keep us lost. Many of us, before we start doing this program, nobody asked the question about why, Tina. The irony is the history white people have in undoing slavery, because slavers were not just about the color of skin. If it were so, the Underground Railroad wouldn't have succeeded. I do agree. I see what you're saying. Without white people's assistance, and there would be no Underground Railroad. They did help. Also, at the same time, some of them were killed, imprisoned, for going against this idea of slavery, because they knew it wasn't moral. You know, we often talk about the immoral moral. Slavery, by human definition, is immoral. But law-wise, it was a moral thing to do, to keep the black from the white and to treat them as if they were animals. Was moralistic, because even your churches, we talked about this too, your churches, your doctors, your family, friends, everybody assumed that these people were less than. We did a series this year called The Men That Deceived America. And we talked specifically about the history of deception and lies. And I gave you different people in history that we don't even talk about. Don't know. We know the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, we know all these different people, the Bull Connors, but there are people who help to teach these folks, to steep them in this racial crap that they believe even to this day. Crap is the best way to call it. Most history is written by the winners. So if you want to have both sides of the story, you have to study other countries' history as well. Absolutely, Sean. You have to be willing to read what is uncomfortable. I said that. We have people right now angry because they don't, we earlier this year we talked about critical race theory and how people were angry because they said that the history being taught to their little kids was will hurt their feelings. It was making them feel bad. But we weren't teaching these children to think empirically. Listen, let me give you an example. Most of us do not think about how the European rose to domination. We just accept it as our way of life. And we rarely present it. I think Professor Lowen once said, we rarely present it as a question. Well, why did they have so much influence and power? Why were they able to subjugate Black folks, indigenous people, anyone that was non-white, and some who were white in face, but not in what they consider white in culture? Because what really the truth of it is that we are convinced and we are told that this country is a stratified country with multiple layers. Oh, we are mixed, but there are multiple layers and there's a hierarchy here. And at the top of that hierarchy, the people in power have to be in power to make sure that everything else flows correctly. At any time, anyone at the lower, the bottom, the people of color, anybody who rises to that upper echelon, up at that upper level, that's disruptive. That's not normal. It's not natural. But no one thinks that it's unnatural for one group to dominate another. But that is the way we're taught. You're taught that subliminally. You're taught that implicitly. You're taught that one group is more important than the other. The idea of monarchy in the European world is still an idea. When we talk about, even in your history classes, when you're talking about the Sun Kings, when you're told about the kings of France and all those European kings, you're told that they were given those kingdoms and they had the right of being the ruler by God. And when you are steeped in that kind of cultural learning, then you believe that there is a hierarchical system that has to happen this way, and it has to be stratified. So we go back again to how the very arrival of Columbus changed the world. And yet, the indigenous people over here were open to Columbus coming to them, a different culture coming to them because of their interactions with the Africans who had came before, that history tries to deny as pseudo-archaeology or pseudo-history. But over time, we have found is absolutely what happened. All things will come to the light. All things will come to the light. And they have. They have. So I really enjoy what we were able to teach this year. You know, we talked about this whole remember this map earlier this year? Let me get back to that screen. Earlier this year, we shared this map with you. And it was the called it the geography of freedom, right? And we showed you the transatlantic slave routes, and we showed you about the Maroons. And we talked about how even in Haiti and how all of that happened made Americans and made the slave trade nervous because they realized that these people that they were said were unnatural, not human, could go into areas where they had at their time their cutting edge technology and they couldn't survive. And they were surviving in the wilderness, like with the indigenous people. And we talked about the laws that were passed, right? How they went about passing. We know that they were afraid of Africans coming over in the slave trade. This is not taught to us in our school books. And they were afraid of these people because they said, hey, you know what? These folks are coming over here and they're escaping. And how are they being able to do this, right? How are these Maroons, how are these people who never have been here, how do they know where to go and how to live in these areas? We can't live in these areas. How are they going to the swamps, right? They went to the Great Dismal Swamps. How are they surviving here? And they passed laws, right? That passed in 1672. They enacted a law, the Act of Apprehension and Suppression of Runaways. That was in the 1600s, not 1619, 1672. And they passed these laws because what they wanted to do was they wanted to make it so that the slaves had nowhere, because they thought the indigenous people, because see, the indigenous people had helped them. When the Pilgrims came over here, when the early settlers came over, they had helped them to survive. They must be helping these black folks. And how bad it got. For 3 centuries, the Maroons, our people. I tried to explain to you all who are here to watch. I tried to talk to you about how the Maroons that lived with the indigenous people. And when black people say, well, I have Indian in me, right? I have this, that, and the third, or whatever, Cherokee, whatever, a Seminole. Yes, you may, because these were tricultural societies who lived together in peace, who helped each other to pull other slaves out of plantations. We went so far as to talk to you about Andrew Jackson. You know, the same Andrew Jackson that the former President Trump had his statue in his in his picture, and I think his painting in the Oval Office with him, and he said that Andrew Jackson was a hero of his. And even when some of the Indian tribes came to visit, he had Andrew Jackson's portrait in the back. And we forget the history because we don't know that Andrew Jackson, right, was before becoming president, became famous for starting the Seminole Wars against indigenous people and runaway slaves. And then Andrew Jackson in Florida went into Spanish-owned land and blew up what is known as Negro Fort because it killed men, women, and children of multiple races, white included, because by his own words, he did not want a place or a haven for slaves, dangerous, violent slaves, to go live outside of the law of whites. That history is not shared. It's not something that many general people even know. Because the truth of the matter is, it's not a good thing to talk about how a future president of the United States, the one who we always talk about Jackson's Trail of Tears, but he had already started the Trail of Tears well before ever becoming president. He knew that Jefferson had told the Cherokee that if they acted as if they were white and civilized, that they would not be treated as indigenous people or as Indians, as the other. They would start to be treated more as men. And so the Cherokee, being one of the civilized tribes, went and actually took land, huge parts of land that are now parts of the southern United States, Georgia, Alabama, parts of Mississippi, Kentucky, Carolinas. And they took that land from them because that was a huge amount of land that they could grow crops. And once they took that land from them, they also took their slaves. There are some reports that the Cherokee were not as barbaric slave owners as whites. They didn't treat it as necessarily chattel slavery in many areas. They treated it as indentured. They allowed blacks to live with their families. But that's not what we want. Jackson never trusted the indigenous people with the Native American. And we talked about this. Did a whole lesson on it about the Maroons. He didn't trust it because he felt that they were intermingling. There's a reason behind the Trail of Tears. He didn't trust it because he felt there was a place for them to run and hide. They were still, look at this map that I'm still leaving up. They still had the thought of Haiti, of the Haitian Revolution in their mind. There was no trust here to continue. And yet we look at today, and many black folks will tell you, they will quickly tell you, and this is the thing of fulfilling an emptiness. We do this. Black people have a tendency to not understand propaganda, but we also we look for a way to fill an emptiness. We don't know who we are, so we claim to be things that we're not. When people tell you I have Indian in my family, what they're saying is I'm special because I have Indian in my family. And they don't think about the other way around, that the African and the indigenous people over here that they have found, because they will tell you that the indigenous people have Asiatic in them. And then if you go back further in history, you will find, yes, they have Asiatic in them, but the Asiatics are also born of what? The Africans who came out of Africa and went up the coast into Asia. You don't understand where you come from. You don't understand the matriarchal DNA, the mitochondrial DNA that comes from your mother's side that can be traced. See, God will not be mocked. That can be traced all the way to early life in Africa. We don't look at that. But we have tried to cover that here. And lessons and interaction. I've tried to spend a lot of my time covering these things because I know we're not taught them in school. I know that it is not something that people like to talk about because even on the media and the news, what do we all hear? It hurts feelings. Truth, facts should not hurt your feelings to a point where you want to be ignorant. Ignorance is born of you not having facts. And we have spent a lot of time this year trying to give you facts, trying to talk to you and trying to break down very, very difficult subjects in a way where we could talk about those subjects without feeling lost, without feeling that no one understands where we're coming from. And I appreciate everybody who has been a part of this journey over the last 2 years. And those of you who have shared the program and allowed us, to just share knowledge, information. People send me, my wife sent me some today. People send me TikToks. They send me messages. They send me chats of things all over that they see online. They ask me questions. Hey, Eddie, does this sound right? And I love it. I love the interaction of that. Because one thing we have to do with history, and I do it every day, is we have to question what we know. Greatest innovation transpired when positive thinking was used to push forward a positive change, regardless of culture, class, or religion. Positivity is always out here, but positivity without push won't do much. It won't do many things. We have to be smarter, better. I was saying a moment ago that emptiness is there. Me and Teddy, me and my son were sitting down watching something yesterday, I believe, and they were talking about feminism, and that in 1964, they believe that was the birth of white female feminism. And I laughed because I said that we were talking about how that happened, right? That was because books were written, right? Betty Friedan and several people, they pushed this whole agenda for white women to feel an emptiness. But she said it was an emptiness, something without a name. And it was called the second wave of feminism because this was after women had gotten the vote, but they were, still allowed to basically, and I'm specifically talking about white women because even though black women had to vote, they couldn't go vote. We know the history of that. But how they felt that they were still subservient to their husbands. Anyway, she called it something without a name, right? An emptiness without a name. And I laughed because, again, and I didn't laugh at the fact that these people felt empty. It's the idea that we have an emptiness and we fill it with anything. if we don't have the knowledge of the past and we don't educate ourselves. I heard a preacher say, if we don't have the God in our intellect, have God in our intellect, we could be deceived. And we try very hard on this program to not put you into a deceptive mentality where I'm just saying things to you and you have to trust it. I tell you, I give you books, I give you places to read, places to go and things to read. But that emptiness that Black folks have allows us to fill it with the idea of I'm Indian, I'm, as I was saying earlier about the African, I'm Arab, I'm Hebrew, I'm anything other than being of African descent. I am everything, but that African is the last thing that I want to be. And we have to be careful of that. We have to be careful of that mentality. We have to be careful of creating that mentality in our children. We have to be careful with that. We can be too compromising, too ambiguous. We don't see color. Well, by definition, the lack or the non-existence thereof of color is what color? Is what? What do you see? Black. Exactly. I just want to be. I want to be me, and I want to be treated, as Malcolm said, with the rights that are given to me as a human being. But if you're going to make a sectionalize people, if you're going to put people in categories, don't put me in the last category when our people were the originators. But the Bible tells you that. The first shall be the last. It tells you that. The first shall be the last. And we have to stop telling ourselves that we are secondary. I think people just don't know what tribe they're from because there's so much mixing that went on during slavery. So most people, that's an astute point, cannot trace their families beyond the Civil War. Just a fact. And many don't know how to even go into ancestral programs and go pull it. And another issue with that is a lot of the time, our ancestors, our frontline ancestors, our great-grandparents and grandparents, the history was so painful that they didn't share it. You don't know who your great-great-uncle was. You don't know what family you came from. You really don't have a connection unless, there's an addendum there, unless you can actually trace your lineage through Europe. If you can go through and find that you have white people in your family, and now you can trace, well, I'm Scottish, I'm Irish. My family was from the Iberian Peninsula. They're Spanish, right? That's how we do ancestry now. But a lot of us don't even understand DNA. And I believe we went over a lesson for that this year, trying to break down the whole mitochondrial and how that DNA breaks down and how science uses it and how it angered them to have to use it that way. Because in my opinion, DNA validates the work of God. It validates the work of God. It validates that supreme, I heard somebody the other day, the supreme mathematics, right? It validates that connection with God in both body and spirit that man used to possess. Even when he did not know the name of God, he understood the works of God. 2 or 3 weeks ago, we talked about fractals, and I'm pretty sure some people thought, well, why is he talking about this? And we talked about this whole idea of fractal knowledge and chaos theory and went deep as I could. We talked about deterministic chaos. These are names given to something to explain something that Europeans could still to this day don't really understand. But they use it in their computing that allows me to talk to you right now. We use it in our analysis of these horrific snowstorms we just had with the bomb cyclone. How did they predict that? They used deterministic chaos, born of the Barcasan divinations, born of African understanding of weather and the tilt and fold of the earth that we know that they had, looking in Nubia, looking in Egypt, looking in South America. We knew that these folks had this knowledge. They were attuned to God. We have gotten unattuned to those things. And God is blessing us still, because even though we don't listen, and even though we don't know where it comes from, and even though they have a limited understanding, I gave people the breakdown of it. I talked about how Hugo Sanitaria in the 12th century took the math that he got from the Islamics who came over to Africa, and they stole a little bit, and how they adapted it and they made it to alchemy. And we read stories of history about the alchemists and how people were in these secret societies and they were doing all this stuff with math, and the Roman church was against them and they were considering them to be witches, and they had to stop this scientific understanding. That same understanding that allowed Copernicus and all of these different people to come up with the idea of how the universe worked, that they took from Africans. And how they turned it then from alchemy into geomancy in Europe, and how kings and queens would throw down and make marks and do things to say they would go to their truth tellers and they would say, this is how you determine your fate. All of this is deterministic chaos theory, as they named it later. But it comes out of a little understanding of the God-given understanding that the African had. And how even the German mathematicians, Lorentz and others, became aware of the system and said, man, this is amazing. Numbers shouldn't work this way. And how they came up with the idea of making hash marks and circles, the early form of binary, and how they wrote books on the explanation of binary arithmetic. And centuries later, George Boole, Boolean algebra, that people learn. George Boole went and he created Boolean algebra. All this came from our people. When we give John Van Norman the credit for creating the digital computer, it's based off of all of that. That's the history. That's where it comes from. And unfortunately, we still have people who are denying it to themselves. We still have folks who will not face the reality of it because it hurts their feelings. You know, my wife and me were talking a couple of days ago, and we were down there, we were having one of our discussions, and she said, you know, these are the things that you should put, because I can become very passionate, and I try very hard to not be as impassioned, because I want it to be clear what I'm telling you. And I feel that sometimes if I'm too impassioned, it becomes less clear. But she was telling me that, you know, you should retain that, because I do believe that it becomes too synthetic, too cleaned up, too unreal. And I don't want that. I want you to learn history going into this new year. I want you to learn history, and I want you to have that passion, that understanding of why it's so important to know these facts. I want you to be as impassioned about it, because when someone says something fictional, when a fallacy is thrown in your lap, or it hits your ear in your workplace, or somebody says something on television, you will automatically know that's not right. That's not truth. It's not factual, because I know the history of it. I know what was done. God gave me understanding of it. Go back, watch these episodes from the last year. Go back and ask yourself, go see things maybe you didn't catch this year. Maybe you missed an episode. Maybe there was something that you didn't see, and you want to go back and like, man, I don't remember that we went over that. You said was it zero? Well, yes, the whole binary understanding. Where does it come from? And then how did we get here? We talked about all of that. When we go through this series that we've been doing, the African in our history, it's not to remove anybody from history. It's to simply state to you very clearly that we have a point. We have a place. We did a thing here, points in African history, and we didn't go, and I gave you books that you can go get, references, right, on how we did our journey, right? I gave you the migrations, talked to you about where did it come from, right? We talked about the whole idea that is behind, this human journey and how we got here. Because see, you can't talk about history isolated. You got to cover these things. You got to talk about why they thought the ape, right, was early man. You got to talk about where these influences from Darwin came from. And we did all of that. Go back. Go back and look at these things. Go back and pull up these old episodes. Do yourself and your family a favor. If you don't want to sit here and watch it, maybe you think history is boring to you. Go back. Take some time to go back and look at these things. We definitely will. Got to make sure we give it to him straight. Got to be sure we give it to him straight. Please go back. When I did this class, as I close this episode, we did this class on the men that deceived America. And I enjoyed this series because I got so much feedback from people who were afraid to come out and just say it on Facebook, but I got so much feedback talking about these issues that changed America. People telling me they didn't know about these folks and who they were, right? They didn't know about Charles Carroll. They didn't know about Wilcox. They didn't know about these men and how they went about changing the understanding of white America and how that has affected us even to today. Statistically, psychologically. G. Stanley Hall, founding member of the APA, the American Psychological Association, that still is how you write your papers and is still putting out thoughts and things to this day, some of them which are warped based on training and study from doctors at the turn of the century. But if you don't, you look at the Upton Sinclair, liberal writer, but still put in his book, The Jungle, about the diabolical nature and violent nature of blacks. Thomas Nelson Page, who wrote The Little Confederates that was made into movies and gave this illusion that the time before the Civil War was a time of great joy and love, and that the slaves were treated well, and that we needed to be basically treated as if we were in a zoo, in a menagerie. And on and on and on and on and on. I love that series. Go back. Go pull that up on YouTube or the Erudition homepage on Facebook, and go review and learn. Learn so that you can pass that knowledge on to others. That's what this is about. I have enjoyed this last year of Erudition greatly. I have bigger plans for Erudition. We've done this just short under of 2 years now. We're about 3 months outside of 2 years of doing this. And I love what we've been able to do. Does that mean that I have 1,000 people on it during every live session? No. But for every one of you over this year who've come on and interacted with me, Tina, and the boys when they are on, who shared your knowledge, your understanding, who have supported us even when we didn't know you were supporting us. The Tony Briscoes, Mike Wiley for the Man Up Show, Tony for your Tony Briscoe Live, for all of you guys, Pastor Razor who supports us, different individuals. I can't name you all, but I appreciate it. I really, 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 really appreciate it, because without your support and without your help, I don't know if I would have continued this program. Because sometimes teaching history can be so disheartening, right? It can be so disheartening, and it can run you down. And I didn't know if I would continue in the way we were doing it, but I thank you all. Pastor Sarton, you're another one. I thank you all for what you have done for us this past year and supporting us and being with the program. We're doing more this coming year. Got a course coming out. Please, I hope for your support on this. This course is a lot of work, but it needs to be created and it needs to be shared. And we're going to get that course out there to you so that we can daily be a part of your learning experience. But I hope for all of you all that you have a great new year, and that you take the time when you have it to go back. If there's something that we talked about tonight in this review that you didn't catch, go back. It's all on YouTube. It's all on Facebook. And rewatch those episodes. Rewatch Tina's episodes. She tells you to do that anyway. Go back and watch those episodes in Adroit Living or on the Erudition Interactive, like what we're doing right now. Take away the idea of that I know and go in and learn something you may know. The biggest issue with people a lot of times is that they get into a habit of believing that they don't need something because they already know it. And it's a lie to yourself. Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. I hope you, as I said, you have a great, great new year, and we will see you on the other side of it. Until then, God bless you.